Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
Standing in the line of duty is a job. It is a job that will cause a person to be in uncomfortable situations many times. They will be thanked for their service, and in those moments, among others, their job is worth the hard moments when they are questioning why they do this, when they help solve a problem, when they are there to protect others, and when they inspire a child to stand up for what is right. These actions make the hard days worth it. When park rangers accept their role, they are taking on a different sort of environment than that of a police officer, but they are still upheld to a higher standard of rules or requirements and of conduct. Many times, they are pulled from the task that they are doing to respond to people causing a ruckus, to deal with an animal making people uncomfortable, or helping to walk the line of search and rescue and recovery. Then there are a different kind of responses. For while being a national park ranger is not always a job that requires laying down a life, it can certainly turn out that way sometimes. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello. Welcome back. I am your host, Kayla. As always, thank you so much for being here. We are in a season where I'm feeling very grateful to be able to do what I do, and this would not be able to happen without you, so thank you. I don't really have much else to say other than we are getting towards the end of October, which means that there's only 2 more months that you can get the 2025 limited edition shirt design that is available. If you go into the description of this podcast episode, there is a link for merch, which you can check that out. Again, that limited edition for 2025 is going to go away at midnight on December 31st. So starting 2026 Eastern Standard Time here in the United States, you will no longer be able to get that design, but I am working on some ideas for 2026. So hopefully that design will be out in the early parts of next year, but kind of got to get some other things around for that. Besides that, let's get right into this episode. In 1927, the Prohibition was at its heights and everywhere was seeing the effects. Bootleggers and gangsters were doing what they could to continue to run their illegal trade, which brought them in a ton of money. It was a risk, but one they determined was worth it. On January 17th of 1920, the United States outlawed the production, the importation, the transportation, and the sale of alcohol until the end of the Prohibition era in 1933. When the Prohibition began, farmers who were growing corn, which is used to make whiskey, saw a plummet in the price of corn, and now with their once successful way of life, they were barely putting food on the table. Fruit farmers who grew crop to help flavor alcohol saw this same thing happen, and because of this, many turned to the illegal side of making money, and this began to cause a ripple effect. When the Prohibition began, Hot Springs, Arkansas alone was forced to close the doors of over 30 saloons, though this didn't mean much to them. Hot Springs is a national park within Arkansas, but it is also a city, and in the 1920s, they were known for gambling, gangsters, and mobsters. There were nightclubs, and most people were drinking heavily, and there was just a little bit of air that the Prohibition didn't apply to them, and they just kept doing what they were doing. Hot Springs National Park was this big, remote area which was used as an access route and a meeting place for the trade lines for alcohol. The remote and protected area also made it the perfect place to continue doing their illegal business with less potential of being caught. Because there was already a ton of mob activity here before the Prohibition began, those who had the money to be able to set up shop in the remote wilderness kind of flocked here. Hot Springs National Park, of course, contains many hot springs. They are naturally warmed by thermal channels that rise up through the crust of the earth, heating pools of water and streams, and has really turned the spotlight on this area. Along with its well-known history of criminal activity, this also cast a spotlight on the police and officials who seemed to just conveniently turn in the wrong direction when tips were provided. While the area surrounding the park itself was a hotspot for crime, located in the center of Arkansas, the park borders to meet up with the city of Hot Springs. So for the sake of this episode, we are going to call them one and the same. The national park has 26 miles throughout the park that you can hike along, and these include the thermal pools and into the mountains, such as North Mountain and West Mountain. The park was designated a national park in 1921, and this is one of the smallest national parks in the United States. As you can imagine, the hot springs have been a place for humans to bathe for eons. Many believe that the hot springs contain healing properties, and this has drawn people here from near and far. Not only have criminals come to the park, but celebrities have as well, like the Rockefellers and Marilyn Monroe. Another name that frequented the hot springs is Al Capone, a famous mobster. Today, you can find these incredible bathhouses and designated waiting areas to experience the hot springs, and they are just very beautiful and peaceful. But in the 1920s, things were a little bit different. It was known in Hot Springs to be an area where liquor was being stored and moved and traded. The mountains had secluded locations where product was easy to be hid, and there were even areas where liquor was being distilled within the park bounds. Members of these groups would have people scouting for routes where they were not patrolled, so that in the cover of the night, they could get into the park, grab their product, take these dark and hidden routes to deliver their goods. According to the Hot Springs Sentinel record, 1,293 violators of liquor law were arrested in 1925, with 84 stills being destroyed, and over 39,000 pounds of sugar, which was used to create the alcohol, was confiscated. Park officials were finding stills being hidden inside hollowed-out logs and caskets. In the log instance, rangers actually noticed that there were hogs behaving oddly, almost drunk, and this is how they found the still. Hot Springs National Park was, according to multiple sources, an area of corrupt cops and political personnel who really allowed bootlegging to run rampant, much to the dismay of one park police officer, James Alexander Cary. James Cary was born in Missouri on December 19th, 1895. His parents being Lily and James was one of 5 children, and like many young men at the time, he was pulled towards war. He had served in the United States Navy after he joined in 1917 at 21 years old and fought in World War I when he was on board the USS Orient with hundreds of others. The conditions on board were cramped, and being on a ship, there was only so many places that he could go. He served for 4 years, at which time he left and moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where he settled into what his life would become. He worked as a mail clerk, and then he took a job at the Army and Navy Joint Hospital until he got a job as a ranger in Hot Springs National Park. Like every other day, James was making his way down the trails, looking around and making sure that they were clear of natural and human debris alike. He would stop and talk to hikers and offer assistance when needed. He also kept his eye out for oddly behaving individuals. And on December 12th, 1926, the winter conditions were harsh but manageable. As he walked, he couldn't fathom how anyone could be out causing trouble, but this didn't mean that no one would be. At 31 years old, James had been a park officer for 4 years. He had seen his fair share of troublemakers in these woods. As he walked through the winter landscape, observing the leafless trees, the steaming hot springs, he noticed ice had formed on small creeks, and he was just happy to be there. Though he was fighting a new war. As we have already mentioned, Prohibition was alive and well and operating within the national park boundaries. Part of his job was specifically to keep an eye out for any smuggling operations or find locations where product was being produced or stored. and it was his job to handle these situations. And he was expected to do this for a measly $1,000 a year, or in today's currency, that is about $1,860 per year. As he hiked, he paused while he was on West Mountain Ridge, and as he looked out over the distance, he noticed some weird behavior. West Mountain has a ton of hiking trails and even a road to lead you to the 1,400-foot summit. So this is a popular place for illegal activity. James put his hand on his hips and watched as 3 men struggled to haul containers filled with about 5 gallons of dark liquid. Right away, he knows that this isn't some easy to explain away activity. The parks are often a designated meetup location where handoffs are made, and national parks are, after all, usually very vast areas where you can hide just about anything. So James watches this group. He knows that Hot Springs has been a hotspot for illegal prohibition activity for some time now, and he is all for stopping what he can. As he watches the 3, he notices that their interactions seem to be in the process of an exchange. It is well known, at least now, that Al Capone and Lucky Luciano were running moonshining operations in Hot Springs, where their product was being smuggled and shipped to large cities like Chicago. And neither of these men were worried about getting blood on their hands to accomplish their tasks. As James watched the interaction, 2 of the men are handling the containers and 1 is gesturing. Then the body language seems to shift. They seem to agree, and this is the moment that James decides to make his move to arrest the 3 men and be sure that they are prosecuted. They are violating liquor laws, after all. As he approaches, one of the men runs away and escapes, while James handcuffs the other 2, who were Ed Halsey and Walter Weldon. A few hours later, the 3rd man walks into the Hot Springs police headquarters, identifies himself as Raymond Hunt, and turns himself in. He tells the police that he is willing to face the penalty for his crimes, but he was not letting that park police officer put him in handcuffs. Days later, a judge found that Raymond and Walter were likely involved in the crime, but Ed's lawyer was able to argue and create enough doubt that Ed was involved, so that way the charges against him were dismissed. Prosecutors were relying solely on what James witnessed and heard from the men, and James was also kind of expecting some trouble because of this. He knew that the arrest was not going to sit well with either Ed, Walter, or Raymond, who, again, Raymond turned himself in, and he was expecting those involved in the illegal trade of liquor to act out. But he wasn't super worried about it. Plus, he felt that he had shown the others that you can't use national parks to trade or even hide product in. Bootlegging was not the only thing being hidden within the park bounds. There was gambling and drugs, and as these grew, it allowed more cash flow to fall into the hands of criminals. These criminals then used that money to pay off authority figures so that they could continue to do what they were doing without getting in trouble. But for James, trouble was coming for him. On March 12, 1927, Joseph Bolton, who was the Hot Spring National Park superintendent, arrived at the park at around 8 p.m. He noticed the flag at the park headquarters was still flying high, which was odd. He knew James was really good about making sure all of his tasks got done before he left for the day, and one of the rangers' tasks was to pull the flag down. Joseph worked with James regularly and knew his work ethic, and he never had a complaint, and the feeling of something not being quite right washed over him. When he started asking questions, and the last time James was seen was about 4 hours prior at 4:15 p.m., he was leaving the parking lot in his patrol car. Joseph decided to go look for him and sounded the alarm when he realized that the lights for the park roads had not been turned on. This could be because bootleggers were in the area and they had turned off the lights so that way they wouldn't be seen, which is a concern by itself. But something told Joseph that the lights being off were connected to James and this odd feeling he was getting. Men started to arrive at the park to search for James, with the alert being sent out, starting at West Mountain, the same location that James had been in when he watched the 3 men with their 3 containers of liquor make their deal. Within hours, they find James's police car, which was parked near the summit, and again, adding to the list of odd details, the driver's side door was wide open. This, if nothing else, though, told them exactly where to really intensify the search. They knew that James had to have been here at some point before he disappeared. Helping in the search were James's brother-in-law and father-in-law. As they walked along the road, one of them looked into a ravine and saw a body.
On Wiki Travel, the Pacific Northwest is best known for its beautiful coastline, green interior, rainy weather, and spectacular mountains. But because of all this, it's also the perfect place to go missing. My name's Carmita, and I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Portland, Oregon. I host a podcast called Missing in the PNW. My podcast is different from others you may have heard because I focus specifically on two things. The first is that all of the missing person cases that I cover are strictly from the Pacific Northwest and Oregon and Washington. I know, the title of my podcast should have given that one away. The second thing is that my podcast focuses strictly on missing persons from marginalized communities, such as the Black, Hispanic, Native American and Indigenous people, and the LGBTQ plus communities. You know, the ones that get absolutely no media attention. Now, I am not an investigative journalist or a reporter. I'm actually a widowed mom of 3 who loves true crime and has a passion for social justice. So join me in helping to spread the word on these missing person cases and help be the voice for the ones that are now voiceless. You can find Missing in the PNW on all of the major streaming apps, as well as on socials at Missing in the PNW podcast. If you have a case you want me to cover, please email me at missinginthepnw@gmail.com or send me a message through Facebook Messenger. I hope to talk to you soon. And remember, have fun, but be safe.
The body of James was beaten and bloody. He was only a quarter of a mile from his car, and it was a known route that bootleggers used to smuggle in and out their product. To officials, it was clear that James had confronted someone, and in response, they shot him. But the question of if someone had been waiting to ambush him lingered. James did not have a gun on him this day. At least at this point in time, it was usual for park rangers to have to pay for their own gear, gun included. James had not purchased his own weapon, instead borrowing his father's revolver from time to time. The revolver was still in his father's possession, which meant that whoever did this had a weapon of their own. And officials thought that they knew who did this since he was found only 50 feet from where he had arrested Ed and Walter months prior. Superintendent Joseph Bolton alerted not only the public but the park director of James's murder and confidently stated that this would be wrapped up quickly. The more they looked, the more that they thought that he had been ambushed, and he asked the director for agents from the U.S. Bureau of Investigation to be sent out, though this would not be approved quickly. As officers searched the area, they found James's watch, which had been removed from his body and then either ditched or accidentally dropped. Either way, the watch was just slightly damaged, and the time had stopped at 5 p.m. This became James's time of death, the theory being that the watch struck the ground either when James was shot or collapsed, or it struck the ground as the perpetrator fled, causing it to be damaged and therefore stop ticking. And this lined up with the timing a woman named Dottie gave when she came forward and mentioned that she had heard a gunshot coming from within the park boundaries between the times of 4 and 5 p.m. Investigators found bloody fingerprints on James's pants, specifically around his pockets, that did not match James's, and this let them know that whoever killed James also likely went through his pockets trying to take what they could before leaving the scene. But soon, it became clear that this was not a robbery gone wrong. The coroner would report that James was killed with a .45 caliber handgun at close range, so close, in fact, that he believed James was physically fighting someone when they pulled their gun, pressed it to James' shoulder, and pulled the trigger. The entry and the line of the bullet indicated that James had an arm raised up overhead at the time the gun was fired, and there were burn marks in James's shirt, consistent with the muzzle of the gun being pressed against the fabric when it was fired. The bullet entered James's right shoulder blade just a few inches below his neck, and then continued lodging in his left shoulder. There also appeared to be an exit wound, potentially from being shot a second time, which led officials to believe that James was first shot from a further distance with a rifle that didn't kill him, and therefore, to finish the job, they had to run up closer where the fight ensued. Police turned their focus to Raymond, Ed, and Walter, since the only witness that they had to speak against them in the court of law was now dead. How convenient. They theorized that the three somehow, probably similarly to before, lured James to them in the woods where they then murdered him. Or there was a potential that he stumbled upon a different group of bootleggers and they attacked. However, it was found that as James was heading out on patrol, he received an anonymous tip that a large stash of liquor was going to be moved on West Mountain that evening, March 12th. Then they learned that a man had been walking along the road that James would be found on, specifically asking about James and what time his patrol was and asking for times and his habits. Police were becoming more and more aware that James had been set up. His murder had been purposeful and thought out, and in response, they started to locate anyone who had been arrested or even suspected of bootlegging or violating liquor laws by James in both the city of Hot Springs and Garland County. This included Ed, Walter, and Raymond, along with a few others, including David Camp, Loris Wilson, Doc Weldon, and Chester Henderson, who they found to be connected to James's death. Walter was the first to be arrested, and he was found nowhere else except for the home of Dottie, the woman who came forward about hearing the gunshot. Raymond was found in his own home with a bloody shirt and pants still in his closet. Lawrence and Doc were located at a farm owned by Lawrence's father about 15 miles north of the park, where they also found a Winchester rifle. Lawrence's brother Roy had told police that he and his father had been shooting the rifle the day prior, but when they asked his father about this, he didn't know anything about it, so police arrested Roy as well. At the police station, none of the men would talk, but then two women came forward. They had been in Hot Springs National Park on March 12th with Lawrence and Doc. They stated that the men had been drinking a lot, and that both of them had been acting nervous. They continued to glance around them, their eyes were flicking about, and they were just giggling at the wrong times. Now, maybe you caught this next detail that we are going to cover, and that is Doc Weldon and Walter Weldon have the same last name because they are brothers. As the pieces began to fall together in this case, police found that Doc, Lawrence, Roy, Raymond, David, Walter, and Chester all got together and conspired to kill James. James was going to testify against Walter and Raymond in only 1 month, and if he was willing to go after them, he was willing to do it again, causing problems for their bootlegging group. But proving this would be a frustrating process. In 1927, it was not yet a federal crime to murder a park ranger because West Mountain was still being held as Arkansas land rather than federally protected land until 1933. So maybe that's part of the reason. And because of this, the Federal Bureau had no claim to the land or the crime, meaning that Superintendent Bolton's request for federal aid was denied. On March 15, 1927, James was laid to rest just outside the park, leaving behind his wife, Thelma, and their 2 children, James Orvis and Leora. Officials began cracking down on suspected bootleggers, successfully closing operations, and, not surprisingly, many of those involved were all in the same family, and most had been arrested previously. Several months would go by before any more movement would occur on the case for James's murder, and the movement was not a good one. None of the men ever talked, and police were unable to link any of them conclusively to the crime. Police had to release the men, and this sparked fury in both Thelma and Superintendent Bolton. Thelma wrote 2 Arkansas senators begging them to investigate the murder because the local police were not getting results, and Superintendent Bolton agreed, writing his own letter that the police were not harsh enough in interrogations to garnish real results. Then, Thelma offered $500 as a reward for information leading to her husband's murder, and the community would end up matching this, bringing it to a total of $1,000. But still, there was no movement. Thelma was enraged, and she would keep going higher and higher, writing letters to the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, stating that she thought the national park was a part of a bigger cover-up, and that the murder of her husband was solved by being kept under wraps. Even going so far to offer up notes that James had kept where he had been suspicious of a man in the park with the initials JSB, who would tip off bootleggers. Who has the initials of JSB, you might ask? Superintendent Joseph S. Bolton. The notebook also indicated that William Brandberg was involved, and he was the chief of police for the city of Hot Springs. In September of 1929, something finally happened. The Wren Report was started, in which J. Edgar Hoover, director of the U.S. Investigations Bureau, assigned undercover agents to investigate these allegations. James's notebook was handed over, and it was never seen again. In December, when the report concluded, it outlined the following. On March 12th, the day that James was murdered, Roy and Lawrence had stolen 20 gallons of whiskey and hidden it on Western Mountain at about 4 p.m. Around 6:30 p.m., the group of men came off the mountain with Raymond Hunt holding a rifle in his hands, and he was laughing as he told Doc Weldon that he had nearly missed James the first time. Doc responded, that doesn't matter. We got him good the second. The men then took the rifle into the barn where they poorly hid it, and then noticed that Dottie was watching them. Dottie, the same woman who admitted to hearing the gunshot and who had Walter in her home, was threatened to not say a word. By the time the report was finalized and arrest warrants were issued, the men had left town, but authorities were able to track them down. On February 1st, 1929, Raymond Hunt, David Camp, Walter Weldon, Roy Wilson, and Lawrence Wilson were all indicted on first-degree murder charges of James Alexander Cary. The men would be tried first for murder locally in Garland County, and then again for conspiracy in federal court. Raymond tried to tell the jurors that he and James had actually been best friends and that they were working together, and then when witnesses got on the stand, the defense attorneys, or those speaking for Raymond and the others, obliterated the witnesses. They claimed that they were not credible due to being gamblers, sex workers, and therefore they were unreliable. And when the jury came back and acquitted Raymond, or basically said the case was not proven, it was because they didn't believe, based on what was provided, that he killed James. And when this happened, the prosecutors dropped the charges for the others as well. Federally, though, Raymond pled guilty in exchange for a 1-year sentence, to which he was released after. The federal judge also dropped the charges against the others when witnesses came forward, providing them with alibis. In May of 2016, the National Park Service installed a bronze plaque monument to a 3-foot-tall boulder which faces West Mountain, honoring James Alexander Cary. The plaque reads, quote, "On March 12, 1927, U.S. Park Ranger Alexander Cary was killed by bootleggers while patrolling on West Mountain in Hot Springs National Park. Cary was the first National Park Ranger to be murdered in the line of duty. His service and sacrifice to the National Park Service and the people of this country will never be forgotten." End quote. While the family faced hardships over the years that followed James's death, they hold true that he was doing the right thing, the lawful thing, and he was killed for it. While no one today truly knows what happened on the evening of March 12, 1927, there certainly are clues that provide enough information that we can walk down the road and know that James was only trying to be the best he could while protecting one of our nation's wild places. There was likely a stage set for James to walk into, knowing that he would act, knowing how he would react, allowing those standing by the opportunity to fire their shot against him. The reaction was slow and, at best, bare minimum. Those in Hot Springs knew that James held information that would end life as they knew it, so they instead ended his for good. With James's murder, it was the first time ever that a National Park Service ranger was killed in the line of duty, and in my opinion, justice was not served, especially when we consider that it took 89 years for the plaque to honor James to even be installed. Thank you for listening. We will talk next week. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.